Throughout my many years of playing video games, it doesn't happen very often where a game absolutely encaptures me in its world. There have been games that come out and I can't do anything but play them until I have fully completed them. I generally tend to get the platinums if I can, but I don't really ever think about it after I'm done playing. Clair Obscur Expedition 33, coming out April 24th, 2025, is a game that absolutely sucked me in and would not let go for a long time. I initially started creating this video script right after I had beaten the game, but I couldn't get my thoughts down on it. And between work and school, I didn't have the time to sit down and power through a script, and so now, many months later, I'm finally sitting down and writing the script. I know this video therefore is late and not many people are talking about this game quite as much, but I don't really care. It is a game that I very much enjoy and I just want to get my thoughts out because it's important to me and I think it'll be fun. Throughout this video I am going to go over the many things in my mind that this game does really well and not quite so well. While this game may have jumped into my top 3, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's the perfect thing with 0 issues. And for anyone who hasn't played the game, there's no worry, I do plan on splitting the video up into different sections, most of which have 0 spoilers and are just things about the game, such as music, level design, the combat, this, that, and the other thing. But towards the end, I will get into, in depth, the story and how I experienced it, so I'll make sure to put a spoiler warning for that. Now, with all that said and out the way, there isn't really much else I can say, so I think I'm just going to jump right into the video. There is one universal thing that comes around when it comes to Clair Obscur, so big that people who don't even play the game, don't even like the gameplay, don't really care about the story, everyone seemed to agree that one thing in Clair Obscur transcended everything else, and that was its music. Created by the absolute genius that is Lorraine Testard, it really solidifies the game in my mind as one of the greats. I don't know how many people do this whenever they play a game, but when I'm playing a game, the music is a very big deal, especially on my first playthrough. I tend to have an issue when it comes to focusing, and so generally whenever I'm playing games, I'll have an earbud in, listening to an audiobook or YouTube on, or anything that can just act as background noise to help me focus on the game that I'm playing so I can just push through and get it done. However, there have been a few games where it causes me to just absolutely lock in on moments because the music dragged me in and would not let go. Well, yes, I know the music within Expedition 33 has been talked about to death. There is a really good reason for that, and it's because it's just amazing. Only once before, Hollow Knight, have I ever been so entranced by a game's music that I'll just tune it in on my spare time to sit down, write something else, or even if I'm just staring at the stars, because it's so atmospheric and beautiful that I just want to sit there and experience it like I'm having an Enya moment. Every single track in the game that I've listened to, which, yes, is all of them, has been so absolutely just gushing with passion and care that it really comes through to the players and makes it way more investing when they're listening to it and exploring all of these spots. The music does such a good job of setting the tone and getting me as the player invested that I couldn't help but place my entire focus on something, especially the story and all the cutscenes, because the music just got so big and boisterous and beautiful that it changed the entire way that I was viewing the scene and just bringing me into it like I was there, and it was amazing. It's for that reason that it has become, I think, my favorite game soundtrack of all time, even over Hollow Knight, which reigned supreme for the past 10 years. Really, it's only been 5, but still, it's insane how quickly this game just took my soul with the music and didn't let go. Another big aspect when it comes to laying down the game's atmosphere has to come down to its level design. The level design within Clair Obscur pairs so perfectly with the music that it is just a masterclass in creating atmosphere. All the locations in the game, except for a few one-off ones where you fight one little shit or another, feels like an MC Escher painting, really, where it's so atmospheric, so impossible, so subliminal, that it simply just drew me in, made me want to just stand around looking at everything around me because it was so pretty. An amazing example of this is an early game zone called Flying Waters. Flying Waters is this big, really pretty area that is built like a seafloor. And if I remember correctly, there's like water above you, or at the very least, it's just the fish flying around in the sky like there's supposed to be water. And it just is this massive atmospheric location with coral, like so many different sea plants and creatures going around that I spent more time just standing around looking up at everything, trying to take it all in, than I did really paying attention to like the layout of the map. And I don't do that very often. Like, I do really like graphics, I do really like level design, but it's not something that I'll just sit there and stare at as I'm going through because it's so pretty. That doesn't happen with me in games. The closest it's ever been has come with Hollow Knight, but it was just me going, that's a pretty piece of background art, and that's it. Not just standing there and watching as these things move, because everything is laid out like a painting. Now, the level design isn't by all means perfect. As I mentioned earlier, there are some locations where you just walk in and it's just a field with a guy standing there waiting for you to come attack him, or a field with this little item sitting there. Now, some of those are really pretty. There's one later in the game where it's like the berserk swords in the ground with just this music disc lying on the floor, and I think it's really atmospheric. But there are just as many where it's so hard to see and I didn't really care about what they looked like. But even still, 90% of the game is beautiful with its level design and just made for an amazing thing to look at while you're playing the game. Now, when you're wandering around a level and you're looking at all its backgrounds and you're listening to the music, there's got to be something to do. You can't just have that. Now, there are games where they're just walking around. I don't care about those games. It doesn't matter. An aspect that this game does real well in my mind is there's a lot to explore and a lot of random hidden crap to find literally around every corner. I was constantly just running in circles trying to find a path I could see in the distance but had no idea how to get to. In the meantime, I was running into multiple little nooks and crannies that held their own little treasures. Now, I won't say that it's all good, as sometimes the way you get to a specific game with a very floaty control does leave a little bit to be desired. Also, though, sometimes I did find it a little too hard to try and find the thing I wanted to, which I know is a bit of a skill issue, but there were many times where I was trying to find this location, trying to find a path, trying to find this one thing that my gamer sense was telling me was around the corner, and there was nothing there. And there were times where you had to go up these very tight, winding corridors with different exits and entrances and this, that, and the other thing, and there's no real navigation method that I remember. At least it has been many months since I played the game, but I don't remember any navigation method that helped you explore, and so it was really hard to remember where exactly I'd already gone, where I came from, where I was headed, and I ended up running the right way too many times and having to double back and just run in random directions until I felt comfortable enough in saying that I had found everything that I needed to find, and I wasn't missing some big fun thing or side boss that would amplify my gaming experience, because, well, I'd just run around in circles for 15 minutes and I was kind of getting sick of it. But it didn't really make that big a difference to me, considering even while I was running around in these circles, there was a lot to find, and again, I really just enjoyed the aesthetic of the locations. Now, another thing that I do kind of want to get into a little bit is some of the items that you can find are oftentimes a little disappointing. You'll go through this big corridor, you'll find this big room, and you'll walk up to it and it's just the in-game currency. Or you'll go through this and it's a random upgrade material. Now, don't get me wrong, upgrade materials are very important for the weapons. I ended up not using a solid 75% of the ones that I ended up getting because you find them everywhere. And now maybe part of the issue is I was doing way more exploring, trying to 100% the game way more than the devs really anticipated people would do, but they do have to take into mind that people like that do exist, and they will do that to their game. Now, not everything that you can find in the game is bad, as, there are outfits, which I think are funny, especially the funny ones. There are ones that aren't as good, but there are funny ones. What else do you need but funny ones? Oh, there's also the music discs, which you can use to play in camp, which I'm not going to say no to more music. I like the music in the first place, so why wouldn't I enjoy it? And obviously, there's more weapons. Each weapon has its own stats, has its own special skills, has its own this, that, and the other thing. I only ever really cared about the aesthetic, and if it had a fun attack, it had a fun attack, and that was all well and dandy. I know I'm a bit of a psychopath. Now, a bit of a sore point that may or may not be good or bad, in my opinion, is there are so many different kinds of pictos in the game, which are the game's version of a charm system similar to Hollow Knight, that I couldn't, in good conscience, read what all of them did. I tried and I just get bored, and so I was only using like 15 that I really enjoyed for each person, because otherwise I would have had to spend so long sitting there and reading what each of them did and thinking about how they fit into my build, and I wasn't going to do that. However, what that does mean is there's such a big replay value because there's so many different builds you can make that all can work together if you take the time to learn what they do. I'm probably not going to do that. I'm going to just be honest with you. If I replay the game, there's a good chance I'll just redo my build because I liked how it played. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still an option, and it still brings more content to the table for people. And I think that is a really good thing. However, it was kind of annoying to look around, go exploring, and then find a picto just for it to instantly kill you. Now, in between the aimless wandering and the beautifully composed and put together cutscenes that are the story, there are many, many fights to be had. I know that there was a lot of discourse with players online about this game for the simple reason that turn-based combat, for some reason, just seems to be generally hated and looked down on. Now, as someone who gets distracted easily and can't focus on anything, I can understand the issue, as it is often way slower and there tends to be less quick thinking skill required for those games. Now, I do think that anyone who says there's no skill required in a turn-based games just are completely idiotic and small-minded. A lot of thought and care has to go into the builds and moves that are made in literally every single turn-based game that I have ever played. There are always so many builds and so many different ways to take a character that it becomes a balancing act of being a hard-hitting badass and making sure that you can actually survive any challenges that you face with healing and buffs. It's a carefully planned dance that players will either fail and trip or fly off in a graceful waltz. On top of that, Clair Obscur is distinctly unique, not necessarily, I believe, I think other games have done it before, but in that when it's the monster's turn, your characters don't just bend over and take it. Instead, there is a timing-based parry and dodge mechanic that adds a new layer to combat, keeping players engaged even when it's not their turn. At least, in my opinion. Also, I don't care what anyone says, the parry mechanic is actually handled really well, and while sometimes it can be a little off, it's never felt like a parry that I missed was not in some way my fault. It always felt like whenever I missed a parry, I could have timed it a little bit better, even if the window was a little floaty. If that makes sense to everybody. I hope it does, because you're wrong. On top of that, it had me engaged the whole time I was playing, until the very end at least. I have one very big distinct issue that I tend to run into when it comes to any game that is more open-ended in its exploration, and that's I have this really weird tendency to need to grab everything that I can physically find. And so when games are based especially in levels, I tend to end up a little bit over what the devs were intending for a specific part in the game. This happened quite hard with Clair Obscur. As I got towards the later end of the second act or the third act, I can't exactly remember which one, I made my way to the challenge tower. Now, the challenge tower on its own, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It brings good challenges, allows for great fights, and can honestly make players really challenge themselves depending on how early they decide to go. Unfortunately, it meant that I went in and said, I have to do all of them right now before I do anything else. This led to honestly a long string of really fun fights that I had to really push myself to make sure that I was getting it perfect. And there were times where I even had only one person left in my secondary team and was one parry away from death and managed to pull out a victory. And it felt really amazing, and I really loved the entire challenge tower. Now, unfortunately, Doing all of these challenges resulted in me being extremely strong and overleveled for anything else I had left, and a single challenge didn't pop out throughout the rest of the game, even though it was supposed to, because I had overleveled and overset up my build, and just kind of backhanded every other boss that I encountered, including any story ones. This led to a big decision in my brain where I had to decide whether or not to purposefully make the fights harder for myself and not do them correctly in order to see more of the big boss moments, or just kind of push through, go with it, because that's how my gameplay was set up. That's how my game was going. It was a challenge for me, and I don't think I really picked the right one because I still ended up blasting through them even when I tried not to, which unfortunately I don't like that much. I enjoy a good challenge. Now, one last thing that I want to get into before I absolutely gush over the story is the overall world map. I just feel I need to mention it because it is a big part of exploring the game. It just feels so weird. It's really floaty, it's a little clunky, and I didn't really enjoy it that much, but there was nothing overtly wrong with it. It just was kind of a bit of a sour spot in the rest of the game, and I would have preferred if it was just the portals and it took you to a different location based on where you were exiting a location from. But I know that probably wouldn't have worked out, and it would have been weird either way. Now, a big sour spot, and one that I will never reintroduce myself to, no matter how many times I decide to replay the game. Most of the gestural challenges I found absolutely abysmal. I didn't like them. I had a bad time with them, especially any platforming section. In a game where there are not fine-tuned controls, having annoying Bennett Foddy style platforming sections is evil, and you deserve all the pain and suffering that comes from that. I don't care. It was awful, and I hated it, even though most of them were pretty easy and I got them really quickly. I didn't like doing them, and I will not be doing them ever again. For the story section of this video, I actually haven't written down anything in the script. I left it completely blank because I know that there's so much to talk about that I just kind of need to ramble on about it. And for that reason, I will probably end up going, and having weird pauses here and there. I'll try to get rid of as many as I can, but I'm sorry for any that get through if it doesn't make sense for me to get rid of them or if I just miss them. Hopefully it all works out because I tend to talk way too fast anyways. The story of Clair Obscur, honestly, even from the trailers, caught me as something that was super intriguing. A world where there was this clock, not really clock, it was the year on a spire, and it would go down every year, and anyone who was that age or older would then die. They would turn into rose petals and flow away with the wind. That hooked me immediately and made me super excited to play the game, and it did not disappoint. The very intro scene where Gustav is standing there trying to determine whether or not he wanted to rekindle a relationship with somebody who he knows is about to die, and then we actually get to see her and other characters that we talk to as we walk through fade away into nothing. It was really impactful and really set the tone for how much I would care about this story and the game itself. It did really well and was such a beautiful moment that it is one of my favorite intros to any game I've ever played, and I do mean that. It was amazing. The game then continued on really strong as the expedition started getting to the mainland and having frickin' Renoir, well, the painted version of Renoir at the very least, show up and massacre the entire expedition crew, except for obviously our main people, because of course. It was really tense and set the stakes that no one is safe. There's real threats here, and there's a mystery afoot with an old person. Old people can't exist in a world where your age determines how fast you die. And he comes through and just murders everybody. Why? What was the reason? How was he still alive? What could he do? What was that move? It sets up the rest of the story so well, and I was so invested, especially when they then went and showed the grief and pain that Gustav felt as everyone died, needing to be saved by Lune, as he was about to kill himself because everything was lost. Everything was in ruin and there were no ways out. The rest of the story went on really well throughout the rest of the early parts of the game, throughout the first act, trying to figure out a way to get to the paintress. And then there's that moment. The end of Act 1. Everything is good. We have the rock that we need so that SGA can, I think it was swim or something. And just as these last two, Mael and Gustav, are about to jump down to SGA, they decide they want to have a moment together, to toss rocks towards the spire and really solidify their relationship as adoptive father, I think, brother. It was a really fun dynamic. And then Renoir shows up. The clicking can be heard in the background of the music coming closer, and it is so tense. That entire moment where Gustav was being killed, I didn't expect it at all. It came as a complete shock to me, even though my father, who was playing it at the same time as me, was ahead, and I could have been spoiled. I wasn't, and it was so impactful. That entire scene was beautiful and amazing, and I was so hooked, and I couldn't believe that he was actually dead afterwards. It left me with a feeling that nobody is safe. Anyone's up for grabs. The stakes are high. It was set in the beginning, but you always have that thought process in your head that the main team is safe. They're the players. Nothing's going to happen to them. But then it did. One of the core people, the main character, the main person I was building my starter team around, dies, leaving nothing behind but an arm. And it was so impactful. And then having Verso come in afterwards, saving Mael and then being introduced and joining the group, it felt wrong. It felt like we were just dropping off this person that meant so much. Even though there was the grave scene later, it honestly worked really well in my opinion, even though I may be sounding like it didn't. It worked so well. Anyways, I know I'm sort of just summarizing the story at this point, and I'm sorry, but the beginning portion to me was so strong. It was definitely, in my opinion, the strongest point of the story, the strongest point in the game. Act 2 was just kind of whatever, getting to the paintress, having Verso build up, going and seeing the Axons with their own bits and pieces that are very important to the overall story, and learning that Mael isn't quite who she seems to think she is. Now, we don't actually learn that in Act 2. We just learn that there's something up with her. She's somehow connected to this weird old family that are going around killing them and are the heart of the paintress. And really, it works so well. It really builds up this mystery, and I was super invested in figuring out who Mael was and why she was so different and why she was so connected. Now, I will say I did have a little bit of the game spoiled for me just because, let's be honest here, the masked version of Alicia looked so much like Mael, there was no way I wasn't going to connect the dots. The second I saw her, I was like, oh, that's Mael. That's somehow Mael. They're somehow connected. She has something to do with the paintress. It was just so obvious that when it turned out that she was actually Alicia and she had jumped into the painting. Okay, side note, the fact that they were all in a painting world and that Alicia is part of these painter families and she just jumped in because, well, in an attempt to hide the painting from her parents because Verso, who was actually a real part of this painter family, died in a fire and they needed it to, well, the mother needed it in order to help her grief, but the father was trying to get her out because she was going to kill herself trying to experience her son's last painting. Well, his only painting. And that threw me for a complete loop. I wasn't expecting that. Don't know how I really feel about that. I'm curious to see if we can get anything on these writers, because that sounds interesting. I would love to see, like, an in-universe, even in painting, like, war between these painters and writers and reality warping. It would just be really fun. That's all I gotta say there. But regardless, I wasn't really all that shocked that Alicia, or Mael, actually turned out to be a member of this painter family, or at least in some way connected. It just seemed so obvious, and I was so prepared for that. But everything else was handled really well and really set up the mystery of what exactly was going on in this world that it didn't really matter to me. Then towards the end, as we had the actual real Renoir finally getting one over on the paintress, because we kill the paintress and it turns out to just be Aline. trying to save everyone she can in her son's painting, while Renoir is trying to bring damage and destruction to them all in order to free his family from the grief. Everyone is killed. Everyone is left to be gommaged. This is when we technically learn that Maëlle is Alicia and that she's a painter. And as such, she comes back with her full memories and manages to bring everyone back. But the moment when the expedition returns, the paintress is dead. And they're all celebrating. Then Act 3 kind of fumbled it a little bit. I didn't really care that much about Renoir trying to get Alicia out. It was just kind of more of Act 2. Now, that moment when Alicia gathers the paint remnants or whatever the hell of all the fallen expedition members, because they all just solidified when they died, and then using them as an army to fight Renoir just for us to go up and beat him on our own anyways. It was a fun moment. I didn't really care too much about the ending. It did drop the ball a little bit, at least until the very, very end. You've beaten Renoir. Alicia has decided she's going to stay. She wants to experience her life with Verso and this family that she's built up within the painting. But Verso knows how bad of an idea that really is. The ending bit when Verso and Maëlle are in the paint's heart, with the young Verso painting this world that he doesn't want to paint. And they have to come to a conclusion of whether or not to destroy the painting, leave everyone to die so that the actual real people can move on, can get past their grief and live their lives correctly. Or let Maëlle grieve how she wants. Leave this real family that you've built within this fake world. Leave them to live. Bring everyone back and make them all happy at the expense of Maëlle's real life sanity. It was a really impactful moment in the story for me, highlighting really just how much grief can ruin somebody. Because the entire time Maëlle was sitting there talking of how she'll be better, she won't be like her mom, she'll just stay for a bit. But then she doesn't leave. If you pick her ending, you can see she brings everyone back versus just a shell of who he was, and everything's wrong. It feels like the entire world is holding its breath, waiting for the moment that she snaps, dies, goes away, and it'll all crumble to dust, with nothing having meant anything because she was trapping herself in this pit of grief in a fake world where she was doing nothing but living out her past. Meanwhile, if you pick Verso's ending, you push her out. You get rid of the painting. You get rid of everybody. Get rid of any chance of holding herself up in this forgotten memory. And in the meantime, you do kill this family that you've created, that you've grown so close to. But you can save a real-life person from wasting their life away in grief. In the ending of that one, she gets to say goodbye to Verso, say goodbye to the painting and everyone that she's come to love, but she gets to live out her life, even though it's miserable, even though it's not what she wants, it's painful, it hurts. It's a real life. And the ending of this story really amplifies that for me. It really makes that a big point in my mind that you need to let yourself go. You need to let things go. You need to let go of the pain even when you have an out, even when you have a safe corner. You need to live your life, not just be alive. And it's a really powerful moment. It's a really powerful meaning to the story, and it meant a lot to me as I was going through it, and I'm really, really glad that I managed to push all the way through the game and make it to the end of such a beautiful, beautiful masterpiece. Now, that's all I'm really going to say when it comes to Clair Obscur. I know I kind of got a little bit rambly at the end, but I really just needed to let the emotions that the game gave me flow out of me. I haven't scripted this part either because at this point I've, recorded the entire thing and I'm just too lazy to deal with it. But this game is honestly a massive life changer for me and really amplifies what smaller game companies can do given the time that they need. Games are such a beautiful form of art, And honestly, I do feel like it's going to waste a little bit with the money grabs that everyone's doing with the live service games, like EA's new Skate. While I do love it, it's just a cash grab. Fortnite, all the battle passes, everyone just needing more money with little things just to keep people coming. And it is nice and refreshing to see a little team bring together this passionate, love-filled story, and it be as popular as it was, given just how small scope it really is, especially since it's honestly an affordable price for games these days, and it is well worth it. With that being said, that is all I have to say on Clair Obscur Expedition 33. An amazing game coming out in a time where amazing games are hard to find, and it changed everything. Thank you for listening. And thank you for letting me ramble. Even though I know not many people really do watch these, it still means a lot that it's a place that I can ramble on to. And I hope to see you next time.